Let me tell you something that might shock you. Avoidants hurt you not because they're trying to break you, but because they don't know how to hold you. Their pain doesn't come with clear communication, soft reassurance, or loving presence. It comes wrapped in distance, silence, and withdrawal. That's not cruelty. That's trauma expressing itself in the only language it knows, avoidance. You have to understand, avoidants were not born this way. Nobody enters this world terrified of intimacy. This fear is built. It's constructed through years of emotional starvation, unpredictable caregivers, and unspoken emotional contracts that taught them love means vulnerability, and vulnerability equals danger. So when you come into their life, when you're kind, consistent, loving, they don't relax. They brace for impact. And that's where it gets twisted. The more loving you are, the more threatened they feel. That emotional threat doesn't get translated into healthy dialogue. It turns into subconscious self-defense. They may say they need space. They may ghost you. They may say things that cut deep, cold words, emotional shutdowns, impulsive exits. But here's the truth most people never realize. This behavior is not malice. It's emotional panic. You are not being rejected. You're standing in the middle of a storm they don't know how to explain. See, pain is their first language. It's their emotional mother tongue. It's what raised them, shaped them, and taught them how to survive. And when something threatens to get close, when someone offers them the love they never knew how to receive, they don't respond with openness. They respond with fear disguised as detachment. They fight to survive what you're trying to offer. They hurt you because they're terrified of you, not of you as a person, but of what you represent. Closeness, intimacy, emotional risk. You're offering the very thing that once caused them the most damage. And that kind of contradiction confuses their nervous system. It scrambles their ability to trust. So they pull away, act out, or shut down, not because you're not worthy, but because deep down, they don't believe they are. Now here's where most people make the fatal mistake. They internalize the avoidance pain as personal rejection. They think if they really loved me, they wouldn't do this. But that's misunderstanding the entire architecture of an avoidance emotional experience. You can't use secure logic to analyze an insecure mind. The reaction doesn't mean they don't love you. It means they love you more than they know how to handle. Avoidants live in a paradox. They crave connection, but fear what it might cost. So when love becomes real, they run not from you, but from the unbearable vulnerability your love awakens in them. And this is why they hurt the ones they care about most, because those are the people who actually touch their buried wounds. When someone doesn't matter, they can stay calm, composed, and charming. There's no risk there. But when you show up with consistency, when you trigger feelings they've spent a lifetime avoiding, their trauma gets activated. And that activation feels so overwhelming that the only way they know how to deal with it is to hurt, retreat, or disconnect. Now, I'm not saying that pain is okay. I'm not justifying mistreatment. But I am saying this. If you want to heal, if you want to understand the chaos, if you want to stop the cycle of internalizing someone else's trauma as your personal defect, then you need to see it for what it really is. You weren't discarded. You weren't invisible. You were too visible. You weren't unloved. You were too deeply loved for their nervous system to hold without cracking. The avoidance hurtful behavior is not a measure of your unworthiness. It's a mirror of their inner disarray. They're not rejecting you. They're running from a reality where love and safety can coexist because they've never lived in that reality before. You're offering oxygen to someone who's been drowning for so long, they forgot how to breathe. And gasping feels like betrayal to their survival instincts. So if you're being hurt by an avoidant, take a step back, not to chase them, not to fix them, but to remind yourself, this is not about my value. This is about their capacity. You're not too much. You're not too intense. You're just unfamiliar. And in their world, unfamiliar equals unsafe. Here's the bottom line. When an avoidant hurts you, it's not a sign of rejection. It's a scream from a nervous system that's never been taught how to feel safe in the presence of love. You didn't break them. You just broke through to something they've spent their whole life protecting. And if you can stop taking it personally, if you can see their pain for what it truly is, you'll reclaim your power. Not by forcing connection, but by recognizing your worth regardless of their wounds. Sometimes being hurt by them is not the end of the relationship. It's the beginning of your own awakening. Let me challenge your perception for a moment. What if I told you that an avoidance silence, yes, that painful, suffocating silence, is not proof they've stopped caring, but evidence they're overwhelmed by how much they care? This is the paradox nobody teaches you. We're raised to believe that silence means disinterest, that distance means rejection, and that absence equals abandonment. But when you're dealing with an avoidant, silence is not always a door slamming shut. It's often a heart bursting at the seams. Avoidants don't shut down because they feel nothing. They shut down because they feel everything, and they never learned how to process it. You see, emotional regulation isn't something they were taught. Connection doesn't feel like safety. It feels like exposure. And when someone who means something to them gets too close, it triggers an inner alarm their nervous system can't silence. That's why they go quiet. That's why they disappear, not because they stop feeling, but because they're drowning in feelings they were never equipped to handle. Think about it like this. If someone's heart is a locked vault, and you start to find the combination, what happens? That door doesn't fly open in celebration, it slams shut in panic. That's the avoidant. You reach a part of them no one else has, and instead of opening up, they vanish. That silence you're hearing, it's not rejection. It's the sound of someone gasping for emotional air. And this is where so many people get it wrong. They think if they cared, they'd talk to me. If they loved me, they wouldn't pull away. But that logic only works if you're dealing with someone who's emotionally secure. You can't apply rational, healthy patterns to someone who's been programmed to associate closeness with chaos. An avoidant often carries deep, unresolved emotional trauma. They may have grown up in environments where vulnerability was punished, where showing emotion meant weakness, where love was conditional, or worse, weaponized. So what do they do as adults? They avoid vulnerability at all costs. Not because they're cold, but because to them, vulnerability feels like walking into a battlefield unarmed. And so when they feel the stirrings of something real, something deep, they retreat. Silence becomes their shelter. It's not peace. It's self-preservation. Here's the kicker. They're not just protecting themselves from you. They're protecting themselves from their own feelings. Because those feelings feel like a tsunami building inside them, one they've spent their entire life trying to outrun. Your presence cracks their defenses. Your love invites them to feel, and feeling, that's what scares them most. This is the uncomfortable truth. When an avoidant goes silent, it's often when you've touched them most. You hit something inside them, something raw, something real. And their silence is their version of an emotional explosion. Let's go deeper. Silence is how the avoidant controls what they believe is uncontrollable. When emotions rise, they withdraw to keep from being overwhelmed. It's their internal strategy. Shut down the system before the system melts down. They don't ghost you to punish you. They ghost you because they're short-circuiting. Emotional overload doesn't show up in tears for them. It shows up in vanishing acts. So here's what I want you to remember. Their silence is not a lack of emotion. It's emotional overflow. If you've been on the receiving end of that silence, don't immediately default to self-blame. Don't spiral into the belief that you weren't enough or that your love wasn't worthy. Often you were too much, not in a bad way, but in the way that finally broke through their emotional armor. And breaking through doesn't feel like freedom to an avoidant. It feels like exposure. They don't know how to sit in the warmth of your love without fearing it'll burn them. You see, many avoidants have never sat long enough in silence to face their feelings. They use distance as a substitute for processing. But the irony is, the longer they stay silent, the louder the emotions become. And here's what usually happens. They try to suppress it, deny it, disconnect from it. But eventually, it starts leaking out in dreams, in guilt, in late-night regrets. Because no matter how silent they are, the truth echoes inside them. So if they've gone quiet, don't assume you've been erased. Understand that you've likely stirred something they can't put into words. And that's not a reflection of your inadequacy. It's a reflection of how deep you reached. Now, am I telling you to wait endlessly for someone to find their voice? No. You protect your peace. You stand in your worth. But also don't misinterpret their silence as a void. It's a battlefield. One you may never see, but one that was triggered because your presence had power. Here's the truth to take with you. An avoidant silence doesn't always mean absence. It often means your love hit a nerve too deep to process aloud. You didn't lose them. You touched a part of them they've never dared to face. Let that truth redefine how you interpret silence. Not as rejection, but as a sign that you mattered more than they were ready to admit. You ever notice something strange about avoidance? The moment you start getting closer, the moment they start feeling safe, seen, cared for, something inside them snaps. And instead of leaning in, they push back. It's not logical, but it's real. And if you don't understand this pattern, you'll keep interpreting their distance as rejection, when in reality, it's fear in disguise. Let's break this down. Avoidants don't run from people who mean nothing. They don't shut down when they're bored or indifferent. They retreat when something becomes real, when emotions start to surface, when your love touches something in them that hasn't been touched in years or maybe ever. And that's when the fear kicks in. The avoidant attachment style is built on one core belief: closeness equals risk. Not because they don't want intimacy, but because they were wired to associate closeness with pain, judgment, or abandonment. Somewhere along the way, usually early in childhood, they learn that being vulnerable doesn't lead to connection. It leads to being hurt, criticized, or left behind. So what do? They train themselves to stay just far enough away from anyone who might stir those same wounds again. Now, when you enter their life and offer love, consistency, emotional safety, something deep inside them awakens. But instead of celebrating that feeling, they panic. Why? Because what feels like home to you feels like danger to them. Think about that. You're trying to love someone who's terrified of love's consequences. You show up, you offer stability, you open your heart. But to the avoidant, that feels like you're closing in. And the closer you get, the more suffocated they feel, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because their blueprint tells them that closeness is the first step toward betrayal. So they push you away, they nitpick, they create space, they stir up drama, or worse, they leave altogether. And here's the brutal part: they often don't even know why they're doing it. It's unconscious. It's programmed. Their nervous system has been trained to pull the fire alarm the moment emotions exceed a certain threshold. To make this crystal clear, they push you away because they feel too much, not too little. And this is where people get it twisted. They think if they're pushing me away, I must not matter. If I was more lovable, more interesting, more beautiful, they'd want to stay. But that's the exact opposite of what's happening. Your very presence is the reason they're freaking out. You matter too much. You stir something too deep. You reach parts of them they've locked away for years. So the pushing, the withdrawal, the silence, that's not a sign you're failing. It's a sign you've triggered something real, something raw, something they're not ready to hold. And here's the paradox. Avoidants often crave love the most, but they sabotage it every time it gets close. It's like someone starving for oxygen who keeps ripping the mask off the moment they feel air. Why? Because oxygen feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar equals unsafe. This is why relationships with avoidance feel like emotional whiplash. 1 minute, they're all in. Charming, present, emotionally available. The next, cold, distant, unreachable. That inconsistency isn't random. It's their nervous system short-circuiting under pressure. They want you, but they're afraid of needing you. Because to need someone in their world is to risk devastation. But here's what you need to know. If you take their behavior personally, you'll start shrinking to fit into their broken framework. You'll begin questioning your own worth. You'll overthink every word, every moment, every silence. You'll chase clarity that never comes. And that's how you lose yourself in someone else's fear. You didn't cause their panic. You just illuminated it. You didn't do anything wrong. You simply got close enough to matter. And in the world of an avoidant, mattering is the most terrifying thing imaginable. I'm not saying you should tolerate mistreatment. I'm not telling you to wait around while someone keeps pushing you away. But I am saying this. Their resistance isn't always about you. It's about the stories they've told themselves about love, trust, and emotional safety. You are not their enemy, but you've become a mirror to their deepest fears. You have a choice. You can try to prove yourself endlessly to someone who doesn't even trust their own heart, or you can honor what their resistance reveals, that you showed up in a way that scared them because it was real. That alone means something. The truth is, love makes avoidance feel vulnerable. And vulnerability to them is weakness. So the closer you get, the harder they push, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much to risk showing it. So the next time someone pulls away just when things were getting good, don't assume you were too much. Understand that maybe, just maybe, you were exactly what they were afraid to lose. Real love doesn't always feel safe to someone who's only known survival. So if they pushed you away, it might just mean you got too close to the part of them still learning how to let love in. We tend to think of love as something that heals people, something that opens doors, softens hearts, brings walls down. But when you're dealing with someone who operates from an avoidant attachment style, love does the opposite. It threatens their emotional survival. And that's where it gets hard to understand, because the very thing that's supposed to bring them peace ends up triggering their greatest fear, being seen unprotected. See, an avoidant doesn't walk into a relationship naked and open. They walk in armored. And that armor isn't made of arrogance or apathy. It's made of emotional injury. That injury is old, deep, often unconscious, but it defines how they experience connection. They don't love from a place of safety. They love from a place of survival. And survival makes people do things that don't make sense on the surface. So when they hurt you, when they lash out, go cold, get defensive, or say something that feels like a knife to the chest, it's really a reflection of you. It's a reflection of what they're trying to protect. And what they're protecting isn't their pride, it's their vulnerability. Their raw, unhealed self that they believe will be rejected, abandoned, or engulfed if it ever sees the light of day. You have to realize, to the avoidant, vulnerability is not romantic, it's dangerous. It reminds them of the times they opened up and got burned, the times they cried and were ignored, the moments they needed love and were told toughen up. They internalized a lesson early on that emotions equal exposure and exposure equals pain. So they built walls, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. That's why their armor isn't aggression, it's avoidance. It's pulling back before you get too close. It's starting fights before the relationship gets deep. It's choosing silence over dialogue, escape over intimacy. Because if they can control the damage, they never have to feel powerless again. But here's what makes it complicated. The more they care, the heavier that armor becomes. And eventually it turns into a weapon. Not because they're trying to hurt you, but because they don't know how to handle what you represent. You see, your love doesn't just touch their heart, it confronts their pain. And pain doesn't like to be confronted. So they react, sometimes passively, sometimes explosively. They'll sabotage, stonewall, withdraw. But what's really happening is this. They're trying to maintain emotional distance, not because they hate you, but because they're terrified of what loving you will demand of them. Because real love doesn't allow you to hide. It brings your patterns to the surface. It exposes your coping mechanisms. It strips you down to your truth. And for someone who spent a lifetime hiding behind emotional armor, that level of exposure feels like death. And here's the heartbreaking twist. The more they hurt you, the more they're hurting too. They may not show it. They may not admit it. But underneath that cold exterior is someone exhausted from trying to outrun their own heart. Someone who's convinced that being distant is safer than being honest. Someone who's terrified that if they truly let you in, they'll lose themselves in the process. Now let's be clear, you are not responsible for their healing. You are not a savior, a fixer, or a sacrifice. But if you don't understand why they hurt, you'll internalize it. You'll think you were never enough. You'll mistake their walls for your failure. You'll carry their unhealed wounds like they were your burden to bear. But they're not. Their pain is not your fault. And their defenses are not proof of your inadequacy. They are proof of just how much they've endured. And sadly, how little they've learned to trust. So if you're in a situation where an avoidant partner is hurting you, not out of manipulation, but out of fear, step back. Not out of punishment, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is not fight for connection, but respect their armor and protect your heart. Understand this. Their emotional injury is not just a wound, it's the blueprint of their behavior. It guides how they love, how they leave, and how they defend. But you don't have to be collateral damage in their war with vulnerability. And maybe, just maybe, your presence was never meant to break their armor, but to show you the difference between love that empowers and love that exhausts. So remember, so here's what I want you to remember. When someone hurts you with their silence, their distance, their emotional shutdowns, it may not be hatred, it may be fear. But even fear wears armor. And if someone is more committed to protecting their wounds than opening their heart, don't stay trying to bleed love into a locked cage. Sometimes the most powerful form of love is walking away with your self-worth intact. Let's talk about the roller coaster, the emotional seesaw, the love you feel one day and the confusion you face the next. Hot and cold, in and out, present then gone. And you're stuck wondering, is this real or am I being played? But what if I told you this isn't a game? What if I told you this hot and cold behavior is not a sign of manipulation, but a glimpse into the battlefield happening inside the avoidance mind? See, people with avoidant attachment don't experience love as a straight line. They don't walk a path of steady connection. They live in emotional extremes. One moment they feel deeply connected to you, the next they're panicking about what that connection might cost them. You think it's inconsistency, but to them it's survival. They're not flipping switches on purpose. They're battling between two opposing forces, the desire to connect and the need to protect. And both are strong, both are real, but they cannot coexist for long in an avoidance world. So when they're warm, when they show affection, when they open up, when they let their guard down, that's not an act. That's who they want to be. That's their authentic self finally stepping forward. And for a moment, it feels real because it is real. But then it hits them. The fear, the exposure, the vulnerability, and suddenly the old programming kicks in. The protective part of them takes the wheel. And just like that, they go cold. Not because they stopped loving you, but because the love got too close. The intensity of connection feels like a threat to their autonomy, their safety, their emotional structure. So they backpedal, pull away, act distant, maybe even start a fight to create space. But make no mistake, that cold behavior is an absence of love. It's the result of an emotional war zone that's been active long before you ever walked into their life. The avoidant lives with constant tension. If I let them too close, I'll lose myself, but if I push them away, I might lose them. That's the tug-of-war playing out behind their every withdrawal, every mixed signal, every confusing shift in behavior. And if you don't see it clearly, you'll take it personally. You'll think, they don't care, I'm not enough, I did something wrong. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Avoidants aren't emotionally detached, they're emotionally overwhelmed. And instead of leaning into discomfort like a secure person might, they default to what they know, pulling away. Why? Because emotional closeness has never felt like safety. It's felt like surrender. And surrender to someone with a wounded attachment style is terrifying. It's too much power in someone else's hands. So they sabotage, they distance, they self-protect, often by hurting the person they care most about. It's tragic, isn't it? The very thing they want, connection, is the very thing they fear. And because of that, they send you mixed messages that feel like manipulation, when in truth, it's just confusion layered on fear. They don't know how to stay. They don't know how to go. So they live in limbo, and they drag you into it. But here's what I want you to hear loud and clear. Just because someone's love is broken doesn't mean your worth is. You cannot fix their inner war by proving yourself. You cannot resolve their inconsistency with consistency alone. You can love them, yes. You can hold space, yes. But you can't anchor someone who doesn't even trust the ground beneath them. And it's not your job to. If you're in that storm, if you're stuck on the emotional treadmill of hot and cold behavior, ask yourself, am I trying to stabilize something that was never mine to hold in the first place? Because when you're constantly trying to regulate someone else's emotional chaos, you abandon your own peace. And that's not love. That's emotional depletion disguised as loyalty. So what do? You see the pattern for what it is. You stop romanticizing the good moments as proof of permanence. You stop internalizing the bad moments as signs of your inadequacy. You stand in the truth that their inner conflict is not your responsibility to resolve. Because at the end of the day, love should not feel like a battlefield where you're dodging landmines of silence and inconsistency. And if it does, that doesn't mean you're hard to love. It means you're in a war you didn't start, can't win, and shouldn't bleed for. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone at war with themselves is to stop joining the fight. Step back, let them face their inner chaos, and choose the kind of love that brings peace, not confusion. Let's be honest. When someone hurts you, the natural reaction is to shrink, to second guess your worth, to believe their pain-inflicting behavior is a reflection of you. But when it comes to avoidance, that reaction is not just misleading, it's completely backward. Because if an avoidant has hurt you, and I mean really hurt you, not with calculated cruelty, but with confusing defensive behavior, then you have to understand what that really means. You didn't just enter their life, you entered their nervous system. You became a living, breathing reminder of everything they've tried not to feel. And the more they feel, the more they fight. Here's the truth most people miss. Avoidants don't run from emptiness, they run from intensity. They run from the terrifying realization that someone finally matters. And when you finally reach that emotional nerve, the part of them they've built their entire personality around not exposing, it feels like a threat. Not because you're dangerous, but because you're real. And real love awakens real vulnerability. You see, avoidants have mastered the art of disconnect. It's their emotional armor. They keep relationships superficial, their emotions tucked behind layers of logic and control. But when someone comes along and makes them feel, truly feel, they don't celebrate that. They brace for impact because deep down they've convinced themselves if someone gets close enough to see who I really am, they'll leave. Or worse, they'll hurt me. So they hurt first. Not out of malice, not because they're heartless, but because pain for them has always been a preemptive strike. An unconscious way of saying, don't get any closer. I don't know how to hold this. This is where most people get lost. They interpret the avoidance behavior as rejection when it's actually the clearest sign that you've reached a place in them no one else ever has. And because that place is unhealed, unregulated, and untouchable, it reacts, it panics, it lashes out. And it does so not because of a lack of love, but because love has become too real to control. This is hard to accept because we're conditioned to believe that love is soft, nurturing, and predictable. But that's not the version of love an avoidant knows. To them, love equals vulnerability, and vulnerability equals loss of control. And when they lose control, they act in ways that break trust, rupture intimacy, and create distance, all to preserve their sense of emotional safety. But here's the paradox.